Our next question is from Sergey. And Sergey says this. He says, several times I've heard you mention the value of the kettlebell clean might be for building biceps. Could you please elaborate on that further? The kettlebell community seems to scoff at any mention of arm involvement in exercises such as the clean, snatch, and the swing. However, certain arm action does seem to be inevitable. So is the arm pull during the clean indeed a deadly sin? Sergey, no. And I'll answer this. I actually answered this question well over a decade ago, maybe even 15 years. And the article's over at Dragon Door, and I call myself the king of the clean, or the champion of the kettlebell clean, or something like that. But I'll answer it there. If it's not a sin, if not, what is the golden middle between the arm pull and the leg drive? Can kettlebell clean replace more popular bicep isolation exercises like the curl? Now that's an interesting question. Could you please talk more about the topic of the bicep involvement and the potential for kettlebells building arms? Okay, let's answer that question first because he has a whole bunch of questions underneath this too. Okay, so the function of the bicep, in school, everybody learns that there's 3 functions of the bicep, but actually there's a 4th. So the most obvious one, if you ask my grandson, what does grandpa lift weights for? He's going to flash the gun, right? So the most common role of the bicep, of course, is this, the curl movement, okay? But the other one that is just as important, and I believe Arnold and Larry Scott, Vince Garanda, and some other bodybuilders really figured this out, is that the second big job of the bicep is to do that, is to move this way. So every time you do that, that works the bicep. So if you're doing alternating curls and you add a little twist, well, at least on the anatomy class, that is working your biceps harder. The third is the job of the bicep is to pin or hold the hand, the forearm to the chest, to this part of your body, okay? And that's the third part. The fourth, though, and very much, the bicep is very much like the leg biceps. I mean, obviously, the names are the same. But the leg bicep, and one of the reasons we used to have issues with hamstring tears all the time, is the leg bicep is asked to do 2 things. One is to do, the leg curl machine, okay? But the other one is to sort of kind of acts as a tendon ligament when sprinting. So most of that leg return action isn't leg biceps when you're sprinting. It's just a very efficient biomechanical movement. I don't know if you could build speed by doing leg curls. I don't know if you could. I doubt it, but I mean, someone's gonna, send me a study that it did work. So the bicep, the fourth job, is very much like that. And the way you pick up on that, Sergey, is when you do something like monkey bars. Now, it's the second time I've mentioned monkey bars. But monkey bars and rope climbing are strangely good exercises for the bicep. And the reason is because it is assisting, it's combining everything together. It's acting in a monkey bar or in the javelin throw, which we discovered, and that's a whole other story for another time. How doing monkey bars started helping my javelin thrower's shoulders feel better. Well, when we looked into it, we looked more closely at this fourth job, and it was like, oh, that makes sense. So by working the shoulder through that big range and using the bicep in its role to keep everything connected, keep everything connected through the movements here, it seemed to really help the bicep. The kettlebell clean does, practically all 4 jobs too. There's no science here. I'm already out of my depth, as you can tell, but you do a kettlebell clean, there's a bit of a turn. You do pin the hand on the chest. You do kind of do a bicep curl. At least it looks that way, but it is happening. And then, of course, it's also helping you hold everything together up here. Interesting, I think where the real work on the kettlebell clean for the bicep is when you drop it back down. you do have to break it just for a moment. And I have found in my career that sometimes the breaking causes, the stopping of a muscle, trying to consciously stop it, gives me more delayed onset muscle soreness than the actual doing. So yeah, I think it is an exercise that is good for the arms. You can kind of tell it is, because that's where the phrase armor building came to me, was from my American football running backs telling me that the double kettlebell clean felt to them like what they dealt with in a game. We ran the veer offense, and so these guys are getting a lot of shots from the sides throughout the whole game. And after that, I realized that the double kettlebell clean might really help my running backs. And of course, if it helps the running backs, it's going to help everybody else. Then pretty soon, there's a long story to this. And now we have the book Armor Building Formula, based on an observation by high school running backs that when they said it feels like the game. Okay, so that's question number one. Sergey asks a second question. And the second topic: one thing that I found most appealing to me in your style of discussing athleticism and strength training was the high value you ascribe to overhead pressing. Absolutely. The kettlebell press is my favorite exercise. The rack position in kettlebelling feels very athletic and right for resistance training. And I got to tell you, the alternating kettlebell press might have been the one that won me over with kettlebells. The groove of the bell while pressing feels very natural. As of recent, though, I seem to start noticing a trend within the bodybuilding field of discussion towards devaluing and discarding the overhead press as the ultimate shoulder exercise. Seems like people are just overhead pressing less. Yeah, I'll just tell you why. It's embarrassing to overhead press because, in my own case, when I was young and beautiful, I used to bench press 405 all the time. I felt that was all I needed because Dr. Tom Fahey told all I needed to be able to do was bench 4. So I used to just go in and bench 4. And then I'd walk over to the military press and I would struggle with 100 pounds. It made no sense. Now, obviously, I didn't practice it like I did when I was young. When I was young, the overhead press was the king of the lifts. When you asked how strong you were, the answer would always be the overhead press number. The most widely used argument for this is that the overhead press does not target the middle deltoids enough. How do we know that? But I'm not going to argue with the Frankenstein's monster concept. I understand that this is more within Frankenstein's monster framework of discussion, but shoulder anatomy is shoulder anatomy. So the question is, does the overhead press still remain the best tool of getting the proverbial barnyard wide shoulders? Could you please talk more about the philosophy of overhead pressing? One thing, I just for the record, I know for athletes that you get more bang for the buck from increasing your military press than from increasing any other press. Now that is a strong statement, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people pushing back from it. But the thing I like most about the military press is it is a whole body movement, especially if you do them like I do, which is the clean and press. Before that bar travels 7 feet from the floor height to my lockout. That's a huge range. And if I don't get the clean right, I can't make the press. So I got to have my hinge locked in. I squat clean, so I have to have my front squat locked in. I have to be braced, locked down. There's no room for any squiggly body movement. I have to have what I call that anaconda strength. So I think that carries over the most. Now, I've mentioned before my love of the alternate press, and I just like it because I think when you do the alternate press, it also reminds your body of that, or sometimes called the seesaw press. I have another variation called the touchdown press. But as you do it, you can really get a sense of how your body lives on that X, that where if you're pressing with your left side, you can really feel your right side having to cramp up. And of course, your left side's working hard, and that's why I like it. So these are 2 good questions, and I wish somebody would write a book about, using the double kettlebell clean and the double kettlebell press for hypertrophy purposes. And I'll say it for the 100 millionth time. If all you can do is kettlebell clean, kettlebell press, and kettlebell front squat, especially with doubles, you're pretty much taken care of everything you're going to need for your body composition and maybe even your athletic ability. Again, big statement, impossible to prove, but I think it's underutilized. Those three movements are underutilized. And I definitely know that the double kettlebell clean and the double kettlebell press are. And I got to tell you, the single clean and press is pretty amazing too. So great questions. So yes, you can build biceps and barnyard wide shoulders with your clean and press. All right, thank you.